They stopped calling. They stopped replying. They stopped showing up. And suddenly, the people who once filled your world with noise were gone. At first, it hurts. You replay everything, trying to understand what you did wrong. You think, maybe I should have spoken louder. Maybe I wasn't enough. But what if you were never supposed to chase them? What if their silence was never rejection, but an invitation? Because sometimes life removes the noise, so you can finally hear your own strength. In this video, we'll explore how silence, the very thing that feels like emptiness, can become your greatest source of power. And by the end, you'll see why the moment you stop trying to be understood is the moment you become unstoppable. Why does silence hurt so much? Because in our world, silence is treated like failure. If no one calls, we assume we are forgotten. If no one praises us, we think we're not enough. If no one notices our effort, we start questioning our purpose. But here's the truth the Stoics understood centuries ago. Silence isn't the absence of meaning. It's where meaning begins. When Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations, he wasn't surrounded by applause or validation. He wrote alone, in the quiet of the night, reminding himself that peace is not found in the crowd, but in control over one's own thoughts. You and I live in a time where everyone's trying to be heard, louder, faster. More often, we post, we comment, we perform, and yet, somehow, we feel more invisible than ever. This video isn't about pretending that rejection doesn't hurt. It's about understanding it and learning to use it. Because when you embrace silence, you stop reacting and start rebuilding. You stop begging for attention and begin reclaiming your strength. In the next few chapters, we'll explore 3 transformations. First, why rejection breaks us. Second, how Stoic calm turns pain into power. And third, how silence becomes your greatest ally in building an unshakable life. By the end of this journey, you'll see that the moments when no one sees you are the exact moments when you're becoming who you are meant to be. Rejection hits harder than words can describe. It's not just about someone saying no. It's about what that no does inside you, how it echoes in the quiet, how it makes you question your worth when no one's round to remind you that you matter. You replay every detail, don't you? The last conversation, the unanswered message, the opportunity that slipped away. It's strange. You can remember every word they said before they left, but none of the reasons feel enough to explain the emptiness that followed. Because what hurts most about rejection is not losing them. It's losing the version of yourself you thought they saw. You built a story about love, friendship, respect, or belonging, and suddenly, that story collapsed in silence. No closure, no explanation, just absence. And the mind, desperate for meaning, starts to fill that silence with noise. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I should have done more. Maybe I was never meant to be chosen. That's what rejection does. It turns silence into self-doubt. It convinces you that the problem was you. But what if that silence wasn't a punishment at all? What if it was a pause, a necessary distance, so you could finally hear your own voice again? We are not built to handle silence easily. The human mind seeks connection. It needs signals, feedback, acknowledgement. And when that disappears, when messages go unanswered and calls fade into nothing, the brain interprets it as danger. That's why rejection feels like pain. Because to your nervous system, it is pain. It activates the same regions of the brain that process physical injury. The silence after rejection is not empty. It's loud, filled with echoes of everything you wanted to hear but didn't. You start imagining conversations that never happened. You assign meaning to their silence, thinking it's judgment, when often it's just absence. But the Stoics understood this centuries ago. Epictetus taught, When someone treats you poorly, remember, they act that way because they think it is right. In other words, what others do or fail to do is not a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their understanding. Silence hurts because we think it says something about us. But it doesn't. It only reveals how much noise we carried within, how much we depended on the outer world to confirm what we should have known inside. The Stoic challenge isn't to stop feeling that pain. It's to let the pain teach you. To let the silence show you where you've been outsourcing your peace. Because that's the truth most people miss. Rejection doesn't destroy you. It just exposes where your identity was borrowed. When rejection hits, our first instinct is to fight the silence. We send one more message. We rewrite the last conversation in our head. We scroll. We check. We wait. Convincing ourselves that maybe it's not over. Maybe there's still a chance. That's not weakness. That's human. Your mind is wired to seek closure, to fill the gaps where uncertainty lives. But the problem is, the more you fight the silence, the louder it becomes. You start losing yourself in overthinking, in endless what-ifs. Every moment without an answer feels like proof that you're unworthy, when in reality, it's just time passing. The Stoics warned us about this mental trap. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. You can't control who chooses to respond. You can't control whether they see your value, but you can control the energy you give to what doesn't serve you." The truth is, silence becomes unbearable only when we demand it to be filled. But once you stop asking why, once you stop trying to make the noise return, something starts to shift. You begin to feel the difference between their silence and your peace. One drains you, the other restores you. And that moment, when you stop fighting for answers, is the first step toward freedom. There comes a moment when you get tired of fighting. You stop checking your phone. You stop waiting for a closure that never comes. You stop explaining yourself to people who've already decided not to listen, and in that stillness, something strange happens. You begin to feel lighter. At first, you mistake it for numbness, but it's not. It's peace, quiet, subtle, and unfamiliar. That's the moment the Stoics would call alignment. When you stop resisting what's outside your control and begin returning to what's within it. Epictetus once taught, "Some things are in our control, and some are not." It sounds simple, almost obvious, but living by it changes everything. Because when you finally accept silence, you stop trying to manage other people's opinions and start managing your own energy. You stop chasing explanations from those who never cared to give them and start asking deeper questions. What can I learn from this quiet? What is it showing me about myself? The truth is, acceptance doesn't mean apathy. It means clarity. It means you've seen the futility of noise and chosen stillness over struggle. And in that stillness, you begin to hear something new, the sound of your own resilience. When you stop fighting the silence, you begin to notice its rhythm. It's no longer a void. It becomes space. A space for breathing, for reflection, for rediscovery. At first, it's uncomfortable. You realize how long you've defined yourself by how others saw you. How often you spoke just to be heard. Not because you had something real to say. But slowly, that quiet starts to cleanse you. It strips away the noise you didn't know you carried. The need to prove, the habit of explaining, the weight of constant comparison. Marcus Aurelius said, "Know where you can go is more peaceful than your own soul, especially if you have within you thoughts that make you calm." That's the work silence does. It doesn't erase pain. It filters it. It separates what's real from what's imagined. You start to see that not everyone's silence is rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. Life pauses you not to punish you, but to prepare you. And as you sit in that stillness, without trying to fill it, Without trying to escape, something inside you begins to rebuild itself quietly, not with noise, not with attention, but with peace. There comes a day when you wake up and realize that the silence that once broke you is now the silence that builds you. You stop craving noise to feel alive. You stop waiting for others to tell you who you are. Instead, you start creating meaning on your own terms. That's when the shift happens. The same quiet that once made you anxious now becomes your ally. Because silence is not emptiness, it's a forge. It's where character is built, where patience matures, and where clarity sharpens. Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body, and silence is one of those difficulties, a subtle one, invisible to others, but heavy enough to strengthen the soul." In that quiet, you learn self-discipline. You learn to listen instead of react, to respond instead of chase, to act from peace, not from pressure. The world may still ignore you, but it no longer defines you. You don't need applause to validate your effort. You don't need acknowledgement to know your worth. Because when your strength no longer depends on being seen, that's when it becomes unshakable. One day, you look back at the silence that once haunted you and realize it was never meant to break you. It was meant to wake you. Rejection didn't end your story. It redirected it. Every unanswered call, every unreturned message, was life gently pushing you toward yourself. You didn't lose connection. You found clarity. Because sometimes silence is how the universe speaks. It tells you, stop chasing what's leaving. Build what stays. You start to see that the doors that closed didn't block you out. They guided you in. Back to your focus. Back to your purpose. Back to your own center. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." That's what rejection is. A teacher disguised as loss. It shows you what you depended on too much, and what you are always capable of on your own. So if they walked away, let them. If they fell silent, thank them. Because what they left behind was space, and in that space, you became something they could never silence again. There's a moment after the pain fades, when the silence doesn't hurt anymore. It just exists. It becomes background noise, a quiet rhythm beneath your days, and in that stillness, you start to feel something new, a strength you didn't know you had. The Stoics called this the space between stimulus and response, the moment when you decide whether to be broken by life or built by it. You begin to understand. It wasn't rejection that shaped you. It was your response to it. Pain introduced you to patience. Silence introduced you to self-control. And what once made you feel powerless now becomes the very foundation of your calm. Because power doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like peace. The ability to feel everything. Disappointment, confusion, grief, and still choose not to let it define you. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. For he is not permitted to prove himself, and you've proven yourself in silence. Not by shouting, not by explaining, but by enduring what most people run from, stillness. That's where real strength begins. Not when life gets easier, but when you stop needing it to. True power has nothing to prove. It doesn't chase. It doesn't argue. It doesn't shout to be heard. It simply stands still. And in that stillness, it commands attention. That's what Stoic calm looks like. Not weakness, not indifference, but a quiet kind of authority that comes from self-control. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." He wasn't talking about moral perfection. He was talking about presence, the kind that needs no defense, because it's built on discipline, not validation. When you learn to stay calm in a world addicted to reaction, you instantly become rare. And what's rare becomes respected, even by those who once overlooked you. The people who ignored you before start to notice something they can't explain. Your peace unsettles them. Your silence carries weight. Because calmness in chaos is power that cannot be faked. Most people chase control by forcing outcomes, but the Stoic seeks control by mastering himself. He doesn't need to win every argument. He just refuses to lose himself in one. That's the paradox. The quieter you become, the more others feel your presence. And that's not luck. That's mastery. Most people believe strength is about fighting back. They think silence means surrender, but the Stoics saw it differently. To them, true strength is not in reaction. It's in restraint. Because reaction is easy. Anyone can explode when they're hurt. Anyone can defend their ego when they feel unseen. But it takes real power to pause. Epictetus once said, "Any person capable of angering you becomes your master." That's the truth we forget. When someone provokes you and you react instantly, you hand them control of your peace. You let their behavior dictate your state of mind. But when you pause, when you choose silence over chaos, you reclaim that power. You show that their noise can't reach you. And here's the paradox. The moment you stop reacting, the world starts listening. Your calmness becomes unsettling. People sense that you can't be manipulated by emotion anymore, and that makes them respect, even fear, your stillness, because silence is not the absence of response. It's the presence of control. It's saying, "I choose not to give you my peace, because it's the only thing you can take from me." That's what Stoicism trains you for, not to feel less, but to react wiser. And when you master that, you realize the battle was never against them. It was against your own impulses. And you've just won. Peace doesn't mean you stop moving. It means you start moving differently. When the noise fades, you see more clearly. You stop chasing things that don't serve you and begin building things that do. That's the secret of Stoic calm. It's not passive. It's precise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." In other words, calm is a filter. It strips away the unnecessary. Every action that comes from calm carries more weight because it's chosen, not impulsive. Most people act to escape discomfort. They react because they can't stand the silence. But when you've mastered stillness, your actions come from intention, not insecurity. You no longer move to prove. You move to create. You no longer speak to be heard. You speak to add value. That's what makes calm powerful. It focuses your energy like a blade. It makes every word sharper, every decision clear, every step more deliberate. And when you start acting from that place, from clarity instead of chaos, the world begins to feel your presence again. Not because you're loud, but because you're aligned. That's the difference between reaction and direction. Reaction is noise. Direction is purpose. And silence, when mastered, always leads you back to purpose. The moment you stop chasing noise, something subtle begins to happen. The world starts to adjust to your silence. People sense it before they understand it. They speak differently around you. They pause before reacting, because your calm changes the temperature of every room you enter. That's the quiet influence the Stoics carried. They didn't demand respect, they inspired it, not through dominance, but through discipline. Seneca once wrote, "To be calm is the highest achievement of the self." And it's true, because calmness isn't weakness. It's leadership. When others lose control, your stillness reminds them that control is possible. When others panic, your steadiness becomes their anchor. You stop being another voice in the crowd and start becoming a presence, the kind that others look to without even realizing it. This is the paradox of inner peace. It doesn't make you distant. It makes you magnetic. Because confidence built from ego needs validation. But confidence built from stillness radiates naturally. And that's why people who once dismissed you now notice something different. They can't explain it, but they feel it. It's the quiet assurance that you no longer seek their approval, and that unsettles them in the best possible way. You've stopped trying to win people over, and that's exactly why you begin to stand out. When you live long enough in silence, you begin to see differently. You start to understand that most noise in the world isn't communication, it's confusion. People speak not to share truth, but to escape their own discomfort. And that's why wisdom is born in stillness. Because only when your mind is quiet can you finally separate what matters from what doesn't. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. When your thoughts are noisy, your life is too. But when your inner world is calm, clarity returns. You begin to see patterns, how certain habits drain you, how certain people feed your peace or destroy it. You start to act with precision. You no longer waste words trying to convince the world you're right. You let your actions prove it. You no longer chase recognition. You create results that speak in silence. And the beautiful irony, you start achieving more by doing less. Because stillness cuts away distraction, and what's left is focus. That's how the Stoic turns calm into wisdom. By turning down the noise of the external world and tuning into the quiet signal of truth within, you realize that most of what once felt urgent was never important. And what truly matters was never loud. There comes a point in your journey when you no longer break the same way you used to. Disappointments still come, but they don't shatter you anymore. You feel pain, but it doesn't control you. You face loss, but you no longer lose yourself with it. That's when you realize you've become unshakable. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped expecting it to. You stopped needing things to go your way in order to stay grounded. That's what Stoicism truly teaches. To stand firm in the middle of uncertainty. To find peace not after the storm, but inside it. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." And now you understand what that means. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want. It's being unmoved by what doesn't deserve your energy. When you master yourself, you no longer fear silence. You no longer fear rejection. You no longer fear being unseen. Because peace has become your home. And once you build that within, no one can take it away. The world will still test you. People will still misunderstand you. But your calm will outlast their chaos. That's the quiet revolution of the Stoic mind. Not to conquer others, but to conquer the storms within. And when you do, you stop living as a reaction and start living as a force. After everything, after the noise, the loss, the waiting, the silence, something inside you changes. You stop searching for who you used to be. You start building who you were always meant to become. This is the quiet rebirth, the moment when you realize that peace isn't something you find. It's something you create, piece by piece, decision by decision. The old version of you, the one that chased approval, begged for attention, feared being forgotten, no longer feels like home. You've outgrown it. You start walking differently, not faster, not louder, but with purpose. You stop reacting to life and start responding with intention. That's what Stoic rebirth looks like. It's not dramatic, it's not announced, it happens quietly. When you choose to live by principles instead of emotions. When you stop letting pain dictate your path. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." And that's the truth. You don't truly live until you stop living for others. Until your peace no longer depends on being seen. This is where transformation begins. Not with noise, but with stillness. Not with applause, but with awareness. Because every true rebirth starts in silence. When life strips everything away, the validation, the comfort, the familiar voices, you're left with one person, yourself, and for the first time, you see clearly how much of your life was built on things you couldn't control. People's approval, situations you tried to fix, dreams that depended on timing, not discipline. Now, in this silence, you begin again, not from what you've lost, but from what's real. This is where the Stoic path begins to take root. Because Stoicism isn't about becoming emotionless, it's about becoming unshakable. It teaches you to build strength from what cannot be taken, and peace from what cannot be promised. You start redefining success. It's no longer about who notices you, but about who you become when no one's watching. You rebuild your routines, not for perfection, but for alignment. You eat better not to look good, but to feel stable. You speak less not to be mysterious, but to protect your energy. And day by day, you begin to feel grounded. Not because life is smooth, but because you are steady. Seneca once wrote, "The greatest empire is to be master of oneself," and that's exactly what you're building now. An empire of calm, brick by brick, habit by habit, until the person you've become can no longer be shaken by what once broke you. Every rebirth needs structure. Without it, peace collapses under the weight of comfort. That's why the Stoics practiced discipline, not as punishment, but as protection. Discipline is not about denying yourself joy. It's about denying chaos away back in. It's about choosing stability over impulse, clarity over comfort, long-term peace over short-term pleasure. Marcus Aurelius woke up each morning reminding himself, at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, tell yourself, "I am rising to do the work of a human being." He understood that meaning doesn't appear. It's created through daily action. And that's where you begin rebuilding yourself. Not in grand gestures, but in quiet consistency. You start by showing up, even when no one's watching. You read instead of scroll. You reflect instead of react. You say no when your peace is on the line. Each choice may seem small, but together they build something unbreakable. Integrity. Because discipline is how peace becomes permanent. Without it, even calm turns fragile. But with it, every storm only polishes you further. This is how the Stoic rebuilds after pain. Not through revenge, not through noise, but through mastery. Discipline is not about control over life. It's control over your response to it. And that's the foundation of unshakable peace. There's a kind of silence that doesn't come from the world. It comes from within. When you stop running, when there's no one left to impress, you find yourself alone with your own thoughts. And that's when solitude becomes a mirror. At first, it's uncomfortable. You see the parts of yourself you used to hide behind noise, the insecurities, the regrets, the patterns you denied. There's no audience to distract you now. No validation to cover the ache. But this is where transformation becomes real. Because you can't heal what you refuse to face. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Men seek retreats for themselves, in the country, by the sea, in the mountains. But nowhere can man find a retreat more peaceful than within his own soul. Solitude shows you what's true, and it humbles you. It reminds you how much energy you wasted trying to be understood. When what you really needed was to understand yourself, you begin to sit with your own silence, not as a punishment, but as practice. You listen to your thoughts without judgment. You forgive yourself for what you didn't know then. And slowly, that mirror stops reflecting pain and starts reflecting peace. Because the more time you spend alone, the less lonely you feel. You realize solitude was never emptiness. It was clarity. And in that clarity, you rediscover yourself, not who you were told to be, but who you truly are. Letting go isn't forgetting. It's remembering differently. It's seeing the same memories, the same people, the same mistakes, without the weight they once carried. You stop trying to rewrite the past. You stop asking why things didn't work out, and begin to accept that maybe they were never meant to. Seneca once said, "What need is there to weep over parts of life? The whole of it calls for tears." He didn't mean to surrender to sadness. He meant to recognize it as part of the design. Life isn't unfair because it hurts. It hurts because it's teaching. When you let go, you make space for a peace to enter. You no longer hold on to people who've already left, or to versions of yourself that no longer fit. It doesn't happen all at once. Some days, you'll still miss them. Some nights, you'll still wonder. But each time you breathe through it instead of resisting, the grip weakens. You start realizing that closure was never something they could give you. It was something you were meant to give yourself. Letting go is not the end of connection. It's the beginning of freedom. Because only when your hands are empty can you receive what's truly meant for you. And only when your heart stops clinging can it finally rest. That's the Stoic way. Not to run from loss, but to let loss refine you. When you let go of what weighs you down, life starts to feel lighter. Not because it's easier, but because you stopped carrying what isn't yours. You begin to move through your days differently. There's no rush, no need to prove, no hunger for recognition. You start doing things simply because they feel right, not because they'll be seen. That's the quiet beauty of the Stoic life. It's simple, but not empty. Disciplined, but not rigid. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking." You start noticing small things again. The warmth of morning light, the peace of a quiet meal, the comfort of your own company. You realize how often happiness hides in plain sight, buried under the noise of wanting more. Living light means choosing clarity over clutter. You don't need to explain yourself anymore. You don't need to chase what's already yours. You simply live. And in that simplicity, you find abundance. You begin to measure wealth differently. Not in possessions, but in peace. Not in attention, but in awareness. And you start to understand what the Stoics always knew, that happiness isn't built on having everything, but on needing less. Living light doesn't mean walking away from the world. It means walking through it without letting it weigh you down. After the silence, after the stillness, comes the return. You step back into the same world, the same noise, the same faces, the same chaos you once tried to escape. But this time, something's different. You move slower, you listen deeper. You don't rush to fix, to please, to prove. Because you've learned that peace isn't found in avoiding the world, but in walking through it untouched. The Stoics didn't retreat from life. They lived deeply within it. They governed empires, led armies, raised families, but they did so with calm minds and steady hearts. Seneca wrote, "True happiness is to enjoy the present, without anxious dependence upon the future." And that's the essence of your return. To live among others without losing yourself. To care without clinging. To give without expecting. To help without needing recognition. You begin to see challenges not as threats, but as training. Every irritation becomes a test of composure. Every conflict becomes a lesson in restraint. You no longer seek to escape the noise. You learn to move through it like a river through stone, unchanged in essence, yet shaping everything it touches. And in doing so, you realize something powerful, that your silence, your calm, your steadiness isn't just for you anymore. It's a gift to the world. And now, the silence feels different. It's no longer the silence of loss. It's the silence of understanding. You remember the beginning, the unanswered calls, the distance, the confusion. The feeling that maybe you were forgotten. But you weren't forgotten. You were being forged. Every rejection was a lesson. Every quiet night was a classroom. And every time you thought it was over, it was only a new beginning forming in the dark. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The universe is change. Life is opinion, and in that truth lies your freedom. Because you've learned to see change not as an enemy, but as the natural rhythm of life. You've learned to let people go without bitterness, to face solitude without fear, to live simply without apology. And somewhere along the way, you realized something profound. The silence you once feared has become the space where your soul breathes. That's what Stoic rebirth truly means, to return to the same life, but as a different person. So now, when the world tests you again, and it will, you won't break. You'll breathe. You'll remember that calm is your weapon, and peace is your power. When you rise from the silence, the world looks the same, but you are not. You no longer carry the same urgency to be understood. You no longer chase after people who don't see your worth, and you no longer confuse kindness with weakness. You've learned that strength isn't about winning. It's about staying steady when everything else shakes. It's about being kind, not because they deserve it, but because peace is too expensive to trade for anger. This is what the Stoics meant by grace, the quiet dignity of someone who could hurt, but chooses not to. The calm power of someone who could retaliate, but forgives instead. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike your enemy." That's not passivity. That's power. It's refusing to let someone else's chaos dictate your character. You've reached a stage where you understand. You don't need to prove your strength anymore. You show it in how gently you walk, how calmly you speak, and how gracefully you let things unfold. Because real strength isn't loud. It doesn't demand attention. It simply is steady, quiet, and untouchable. And that's how the Stoic begins to live again. Not in resistance, but in rhythm. Real strength doesn't close its heart. It opens it wisely. You've been through the silence. You've known the ache of rejection. And because of that, you now see pain differently. You no longer judge it. You recognize it. When you see anger in someone's eyes, you no longer feel attacked. You see fear behind it. When someone speaks harshly, you hear the exhaustion they hide. That's what suffering teaches. Empathy without attachment. You can care deeply, but still protect your peace. The Stoics never taught indifference. They taught discernment, to give love freely, but not lose yourself in giving, to help others, but not carry what isn't yours. Seneca said, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness." But kindness doesn't mean compliance. It means choosing to act from integrity, even when others act from ignorance. This is compassion with boundaries, a love that understands limits. You can walk away without hatred. You can forgive without reopening old wounds. That's how strength and compassion coexist, not as opposites, but as two sides of the same wisdom. Because the strongest souls are often the gentlest ones. Not because they've never been hurt, but because they've learned what truly matters. Peace over pride, presence over proof. And that's where grace begins, in the choice to stay kind, even when the world is not. Dignity isn't something you're born with. It's something you build, moment by moment, choice by choice. It's the art of remaining composed when chaos tries to pull you in. The ability to speak truth without raising your voice. To hold your ground without losing your grace. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That is the discipline of dignity, living in alignment with your principles, not your moods. Because the world will test you. People will misunderstand your calm for weakness, your silence for arrogance, your boundaries for distance. But a Stoic doesn't react to perception. He acts from intention. He knows that how he behaves is a reflection of himself, not of others. That's why he stays measured. Not because he lacks passion, but because he refuses to waste it. Dignity is quiet power. It's saying, I won't let your chaos turn me cruel. It's choosing self-respect over being right. And here's the truth. Dignity takes more strength than aggression ever will. Because aggression feeds the ego. Dignity feeds the soul. It's the invisible armor that protects your peace. Not by fighting the world, but by mastering your response to it. When you move through life with dignity, you don't need validation. Your actions speak louder than approval ever could. The world will keep testing you, not with grand challenges, but with small provocations, a careless word, a broken promise, a rude comment that was never about you in the first place. And in those moments, your old self will want to rise, to defend, to explain, to prove. But your wiser self pauses, because wisdom doesn't react, it reflects. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, when you are offended at any man's fault, turn to yourself and study your own failings. That isn't self-blame, it's awareness. It's realizing that your peace is your responsibility. The Stoic doesn't try to control the behavior of others. He learns to master the interpretation of it. He asks, what can I learn from this? Instead of, how dare they? And that small shift changes everything. Because when you stop taking things personally, you stop giving away your power. You start seeing how often people speak from pain, how rarely their actions are truly about you. You begin to respond from understanding, not from ego. That's wisdom in motion, the ability to stand firm in storms without needing to silence the thunder. You listen more, you speak less, and when you do speak, your words carry the calm of someone who's already made peace with himself. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more presence. And that's what you offer now, not as a performance, but as a way of being. Forgiveness is not for them. It's for you. It's the moment you decide that carrying the pain costs more than letting it go. People will wrong you. They will misunderstand, betray, or abandon you. That's the nature of life. Imperfect people, doing imperfect things, but holding on to their actions only chains you to the past. Marcus Aurelius said, the best way to avenge yourself is to not become like them. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. Because when you choose forgiveness, you stop letting old wounds dictate who you become. Forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It means you stop bleeding for what's already gone. It's choosing peace over poison, freedom over resentment. And here's what most people miss. Forgiveness isn't a single act. It's a practice. Some days you'll feel free, and the next, the anger creeps back in. That's okay. Healing isn't linear. It's patient. The Stoic forgives not to erase the past, but to reclaim the present. He knows that bitterness keeps him bound to the very thing he wishes to escape. When you forgive, you're not excusing their behavior. You're refusing to let it own your heart any longer. You walk lighter, speak softer, breathe deeper, because you finally understand. Forgiveness is not about closing the chapter. It's about no longer needing to reopen it. At some point, you realize that wisdom doesn't need to be spoken. It needs to be lived. You stop trying to convince others to change. You stop correcting every misunderstanding. You start embodying what you once tried to explain. Because the Stoic way isn't about preaching philosophy. It's about becoming proof of it. Marcus Aurelius never sought followers, yet centuries later, millions still follow his words. Not because he demanded attention, but because he embodied integrity in silence. That's what happens when your actions speak louder than your opinions. You begin to influence not by authority, but by example. You don't need to tell others how to stay calm. They feel it when they're around you. You don't need to declare your values. They see them in how you treat people. The Stoic understands. Real power is quiet because it's consistent. Every choice, every word, every gesture becomes a reflection of your inner order. You hold doors open without expecting thanks. You listen fully without preparing your reply. You forgive faster than they expect. And people notice. Not because you're performing, but because your peace feels different. That's how you teach without teaching. By living in such a way that your stillness becomes a mirror for others. Because at the end of the day, you can't change the world by telling it what to do. You change it by showing what's possible. You've learned to be calm in storms, to forgive without forgetting, to lead without shouting. Now, it's time to live, fully, gently, and with grace. Grace is not passivity. It's movement without resistance. It's walking through life without letting life harden you. The Stoics didn't seek isolation. They participated in work, in family, in society, but with a different rhythm. They moved like rivers, quiet, steady, unstoppable. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire in chaos, yet his writings spoke of patience, of reason, of compassion. That's grace in motion. The ability to hold power without arrogance, to endure conflict without cruelty. You can do the same. You can face harsh words with a soft voice. You can walk into difficult spaces and leave them calmer than before. You can bring light without needing to be the brightest in the room. Because the goal was never to escape the world. It was to move through it with mastery. When you act with grace, your strength doesn't need to shout. It's felt in your patience, in your consistency, in the peace that follows you wherever you go. And that's the quiet mark of someone who's truly free, not untouchable, but untroubled. So keep walking softly, not because the world deserves your gentleness, but because you do. Wisdom isn't real until it's lived. All the books, the reflections, the moments of silence, they mean nothing if they don't change how you show up in the world. The Stoics never sought perfection. They sought presence, to live each day with awareness, clarity, and calm. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." And that's what this chapter is about. Taking everything you've learned and bringing it home to the small moments that make a life. Because Stoicism was never meant for temples or theories. It was meant for mornings when you wake up tired but still get up. For conversations where you choose patience over pride. For days when everything goes wrong, and yet you still find a reason to be grateful. The Stoic way isn't about escaping life. It's about entering it fully, without letting it own you. When someone criticizes you, you breathe before responding. When plans fall apart, you focus on what remains within your control. When success arrives, you receive it with gratitude, not vanity. This is what real mastery looks like. Not a life without storms, but a life where storms no longer decide your direction. Every day becomes a practice ground. Every moment a test, and every breath an opportunity to live wisely, to love deeply, and to remain calm within yourself. The day begins long before the world wakes up. It starts in the quiet, in that still hour when the sky hasn't yet decided on its color. The Stoics believed that how you greet the morning shapes how you face the world. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "When you rise in the morning, think of what a privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." That's not just poetry, it's preparation. Each morning is a reminder. You have another chance to act with virtue, to practice patience, to respond with wisdom. Before the noise of the world begins, you sit in silence. You breathe. You remind yourself what is within your control and what is not. And in that awareness, the day already becomes lighter. The Stoic morning doesn't rush. It observes. You don't wake to chase. You wake to align. You set intentions instead of expectations. You choose presence over pressure. Because if you don't anchor yourself early, the world will pull you into its storms before you even notice. So you move slowly. You write, you stretch, you reflect on gratitude. Not because life is perfect, but because you are still here to try again. That's how Stoicism turns mornings into rituals of strength. You don't need loud motivation or caffeine-fueled ambition. You need awareness, the simple recognition that peace begins in the first breath you take consciously, and when you start your day in stillness. You carry that stillness into everything that follows. Work is not punishment. It's the arena where your philosophy is tested. Anyone can be calm in solitude. But can you stay calm in a meeting full of noise? Can you hold your composure when deadlines close in, when others lose control, when nothing goes as planned? That's where Stoicism becomes real. Marcus Aurelius led an empire through war and plague, and yet he wrote about gratitude, focus, and restraint. Because to him, every challenge was training. What stands in the way becomes the way. That single line carried him through every difficulty, and it can carry you, too. When you face pressure, don't resist it, use it. Let it refine your focus, not fracture it. Let it sharpen your patience, not shorten your temper. The Stoic doesn't complain about obstacles. He studies them. He asks, what is this trying to teach me? Because every problem carries a lesson, and every frustration reveals where growth is still needed. You begin to work differently, not for approval, but for excellence. Not to impress, but to improve. And slowly, your work transforms. It's no longer a source of stress. It's a space for mastery. You don't dread the difficult days anymore. You welcome them because you know they're shaping something invisible. Your discipline, your patience, your strength. The Stoic doesn't seek an easy life. He seeks a meaningful one. And work, with all its imperfections, is one of the best places to build it. No philosophy is real until it meets love, conflict, and loss. It's easy to stay calm in isolation, harder when hearts are involved. But the Stoic understands that love and reason can coexist. You can care deeply without losing yourself. You can stay connected without becoming dependent. You can give without keeping score. Epictetus said, when you kiss your child, remind yourself that you may not have him tomorrow. It sounds cold, but it isn't. It's a reminder to love fully, yet lightly, to hold people with open hands, not clenched fists. The Stoic doesn't suppress emotion. He refines it. He feels everything. Joy, affection, longing. But he doesn't let those feelings control his peace, because love rooted in fear becomes possession. But love rooted in understanding becomes freedom. You learn to stop expecting others to fill your emptiness. You start showing up whole, not needing, but choosing, not clinging, but appreciating. In relationships, the Stoic practices presence. He listens more than he speaks. He forgives faster than he blames. He values peace over pride. And when conflict rises, he remembers, not every battle needs to be fought. Not every silence needs to be broken. Sometimes the strongest response is understanding. Sometimes love is letting things be. Because true connection isn't about control. It's about clarity. And when both people meet from that place, there's no fear of losing, only the joy of sharing. That's the Stoic way to love, with depth, with honesty, and with peace. No matter how wise or calm you become, life will still take things from you. People will leave, plans will fall apart, time will move faster than your heart is ready for. And yet, this, too, is life. The Stoics never promised comfort. They promised clarity. They knew that loss is not a punishment. It's proof of how much you've lived, how deeply you've cared. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You could leave life right now, Let that determine what you do and say and think. That thought isn't morbid, it's freeing. It reminds you that every moment is borrowed, and everything you love is temporary by nature. You can resist that truth and suffer, or accept it and be at peace. Because when you stop clinging to permanence, you start cherishing the present. You look at people differently, with more tenderness, because you know you can't keep them forever. You face endings differently, with more gratitude, because even the shortest chapter had meaning. The Stoic doesn't numb himself to loss. He lets it humble him. He lets it sharpen his awareness that life is fragile and precious. So when uncertainty comes, and it always does, you breathe. You ground yourself, and you whisper, I was never promised forever, only today. And that truth, while heavy, becomes the very source of peace, because the more you accept impermanence, the more fully you begin to live. Joy is not loud. It doesn't dance or shout. It sits quietly beside you, often unnoticed, until you slow down enough to feel it. For the Stoic, joy isn't the absence of pain. It's the awareness that even amid pain, life is still good. Marcus Aurelius wrote, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself. That's the essence of Stoic joy, not to wait for a perfect conditions, but to find beauty in the imperfect now. You begin to realize that peace and joy are not rewards for getting life right. They are practices. You choose them every morning you wake up. You protect them every time you refuse to overreact. You cultivate them every time you return to gratitude. You find joy in simplicity, in quiet mornings, in shared laughter, in the privilege of being alive one more day. The Stoic doesn't need grand victories to feel fulfilled. He finds meaning in small consistencies, in doing what's right, in helping quietly, in ending each day knowing he stayed true to himself. Joy, to him, isn't an emotion, it's alignment. It's living without resistance to life. Even when things go wrong, he whispers, this too belongs, because he understands joy isn't something to be chased. It's something to be remembered. It's what's left when fear fades, when wanting stops, when being becomes enough. In the end, no one remembers how loud you were. They remember how you made them feel. They remember the calm you carried into chaos, the steadiness you brought when others were losing ground, the way your silence gave them permission to breathe again. That is the legacy of a Stoic life. Not fame, not recognition, but influence born of inner peace. Marcus Aurelius never built monuments for himself, yet his thoughts have outlived empires, because truth spoken from calm echoes longer than pride shouted in noise. You don't have to lead armies or rule nations to leave a mark. You lead every day, in how you treat others, in how you respond when things fall apart, in how you choose to remain kind even when it costs you. The Stoic legacy is simple: to live in such a way that your peace becomes contagious, that your patience becomes strength for others, that your example becomes a quiet light in a loud world. Seneca wrote, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. And when you do, when you truly live with clarity, discipline, and grace, you realize something profound. Your life itself becomes the lesson, not through words, but through presence. So when you leave, you won't need a monument. Your calm will remain in the hearts you've touched, and your silence will continue to speak long after you're gone. Because the Stoic doesn't live to be remembered. He lives to remember what truly matters, and that is enough. So here we are, at the end of a long journey, and maybe at the beginning of something truer. We began with questions. How do we stay calm in a world that never stops moving? How do we protect our peace when everything seems designed to steal it? And along the way, we learned that peace isn't something to find. It's something to build. Brick by brick, moment by moment, from the first chapter, you learned how to stand still, to master your thoughts instead of being mastered by them. Then, you learned to protect that stillness, to respond to the world with wisdom, to forgive not for others, but for yourself. You discovered that strength doesn't always look like control. Sometimes, it's the grace to let go. You learned to work without losing your soul, to love without losing yourself, to face loss without losing meaning, and somewhere in between. You found a quieter kind of joy, the kind that doesn't fade when the world changes, because true Stoicism was never about becoming untouchable. It was about becoming unshaken. You now understand that calm isn't weakness. It's power, the kind of power that doesn't dominate others, but liberates yourself. You don't need to be perfect to be peaceful. You just need to be present. The Stoics didn't seek heaven elsewhere. They built it here, in how they thought, how they spoke, how they lived. And now, you can dot because in the end, this isn't just a philosophy. It's a way of being. The promise to meet life as it is, to rise when it's heavy, to love when it's hard, and to remain gentle in a world that rewards rage. That's what this journey has been about. Not learning how to escape pain, but learning how to live wisely within it. And if you've made it here, you already carry that wisdom. It's in your pauses, in your choices, in the calm you offer when others can't. So take a deep breath. This is not the end. This is where the practice begins. If this message stayed with you, if somewhere along the way, you felt a small part of yourself quiet down, breathe deeper, and remember who you really are, then this was worth it. Because that's all Stoicism ever was, not a theory, not a system, but a way back to yourself. At StoicCraft, we don't talk about perfection, we talk about presence. We fall, we rise, we learn together. If you found meaning here, stay with us. There are more lessons to explore, more reflections to share, and more ways to grow quietly stronger. One thought at a time. You can subscribe, not to chase content, but to continue this conversation. Because the truth is, we're all still learning how to live, how to be calm in the noise, kind in the chaos, and unshaken in the storms. So let this be your reminder. You're not walking alone. Every time you return here, you return to yourself, and that is where peace truly begins.